Hello, welcome back to the Lick of the Week videos. This is our second video in that series I'm calling Transition Licks and Ideas. And I just want to pick up kind of where we left off in the previous video, which is moving from G to C. And as we talked about in the first video, I'm using that dominant sound. In this case, since we're talking about G to C, we're going to drop in an F note to play those licks that we did in the previous video, and we just rolled over that F note. So it was all based on the F note. I want to continue with that F note theme, but we're going to step the level of complexity, I guess, up from the previous video to this one. So it'll still include F notes in most of these examples, but we'll be adding, I guess, more exotic note choices to it to kind of flavor it a little differently. One of my favorite ones, which I'm not really sure of the origin of, I'll give credit to Terry Balcom. He's one of the first players I remember hearing do this in the late 70s, early 80s. He may not have invented the lick, but he sure did great things with it in his playing. The lick sounded like this. So there was the inclusion of the F note, but there was some cool riffage, as one of my buddies likes to say, before the inclusion of the F note. So let me give you a zoom of the fingerboard, and we'll count off the notes to see how long the transition lick lasts, and we'll look at the notes themselves. So the notes themselves, as far as the right hand goes, is 1, 2, 3. It's a backwards roll, 1, 2, 3. But what we're doing with the left hand is doing a pull off or push off, whichever one you prefer, from the second string first fret, which is a C note. I'm going to do a push off. So the roll doesn't get interrupted. It's just a 1, 2, 3 roll with a push off on the first fret of the second string. Now from there, here's where we'd include the F note. And that's just an old-fashioned arpeggio, which means playing across all the notes of the chord. This case, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you can go thumb, index, thumb, middle. And usually I'll go thumb, thumb, index, middle. I'll leave the right hand up to you. So this is kind of a rolling idea, similar to what we did in the first video, where you just roll over an F note, which builds tension, you know, leading you to C. But we have some cool notes that lead up to that. Now, time-wise, if you're counting that, 1 and 2 and, that would be, you know, generally speaking, like common time. If you're counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, that would be a half measure. If you were counting cut time, where the beats are like 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, then that would be a one measure lick. But I'm going to think about this as being common time, which would give you 1 and 2 and. Let me use that in an example of, say, 9-pound hammer. So the lick is a transition lick, and it's about 2 beats long, and you'll have to decide how to fit it in a measure. Sometimes if you're using it in a solo like I did for 9-pound hammer, you might have to erase or rearrange some of the melody notes, because you might not have room to play the entire melody the way it's structured inside the measure and play the transition lick. And sometimes it leads to a creative way to restate the melody. Sometimes it just means chopping away the melody in place of the transition. But it is a pretty cool lick. Okay, another lick that I like a lot, and again, I'm not sure of the origin of the lick, but it's one that a lot of players are familiar with. And it has similarities to the previous lick in that it has that dominant arpeggio sound. We're just kind of rolling over an F note again. But this time it gets a little more complicated in that we work our way down from a G note first string at 5. And the right hand pattern for this is 1, 3, 2, 1. So it's a 4-note pattern. 1, 3, 2, 1. Now we're going to move to this, which is actually functioning here as a G9 chord, believe it or not. We have an F note and we have an A note. So we have kind of a sound of a G9 chord. And ninth chords are not something you talk a lot about in traditional bluegrass, but there are some 9-chord sounds there. But we're using these two notes, the F note and the A note, in this lick. So we have 1, 3, 2, 1, 1, 3, 2, 1. Now, different versions of this lick have evolved through the years. The lick that I like to play actually doesn't repeat the same roll twice. It actually goes to a reverse roll. So you can play the same roll again, but I think most popular versions of this lick would have you go into a reverse roll here. So let's try that. We'll play 1, 3, 2, 1, plant the A and the F notes on their respective strings, and play 3, 2, 1, 5, which is just a forward roll. Now at this point I've switched to this E note on the first string at 2. And I'm playing a backwards roll, 1, 2, 3. And you could release the open first string at that point or come back to that E note. And now we're going to do the arpeggio idea. Sorry. So we're going back from F across all 4 strings. So it's like the first half of this has been replaced with more notes. So this, if you counted this, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... It's a pretty convoluted transition lick that actually lasts an entire measure. So you'll be limited by where and why you would place this transition lick to get from G to C. If you tried to use that in, say, the opening measure of 9-Pound Hammer, you would have to totally erase the melody for that first measure, because there's not room for the melody notes and that lick. That lick doesn't have any similarities at all to the melody of 9-Pound Hammer, the way you would sing it. So this is typically going to be a lick that comes what I call at a tag lick area. So let's say you've already played the break one time through and there's a hole there and the song's returning to G, maybe in your backup. You could use that transition lick to get you from G to C in your backup. Or it could be that you're just doing an improvised break and you're not worried about soloing. Then this transition lick actually functions as part of your solo. So you might be playing that for an entire measure instead of trying to play some other Scruggs lick. But again, I'll leave that up to you. It's, you know, for you to decide where, when, and how to use it. So now we have these licks to add to your repertoire, which leads you to C, or this. And that one also leads you to C. Now the Sonny Osborne lick that we did previously has a lot of different cool variations. And this is one that people hear a lot, and this will include the F note on the first string, not this one. So what we're going to do, instead of playing the 4th string here for the F, we're going to play the 1st string here. And what I'm going to do is hold that F note with my pinky and hammer and pinch at the same time. So I'm pulling the 1st and 2nd strings together as a pinch, and I'm hammering to that C note. That was the same note we pushed off of earlier for the Balkan lick. then whatever you do after that, you'll hear a lot of different variations of it. There's ways you can come off of the 4th string onto the 1st. There's tons of variations, but I just want to give you one basic idea that you can play around with, which is the F and the C. You can do some more hammers, some more pinches, but make sure you include the 1st string in that. And the C note is pretty much just for flavoring, and it kind of teases you a little bit. It's introducing the C note, which is the root note from the chord you're going to. So it's kind of like a teaser. It's like a sneak preview at the movie. It's giving you a little bit of the C sound before actually going to the C chord in the progression. But again, now you have to decide, you know, how long. 1 and 2 and. It's about 2 beats long, as most transition licks tend to be. And you can make it longer. You'll come up with some pretty cool variations of your own if you just kind of hold the F and just play around with it. This is what I found, that a lot of these transition licks you learn in one standard form almost always wound up morphing into something else. You'll start playing around with the position, play around with rolls. And of course, this is just stroke style rolls. You can mix single string ideas in here. And you can do a lot of cool things with the notes. So you could even combine maybe the first one. You'll come up with even more transition licks from G to C. But I think the ones that I've given you in the first and the second video should keep you busy for a while. And like I said, they'll generally lead you to find other transition licks, maybe of your own. Maybe you'll be experimenting with a position and it will sound like a transition lick that you've heard somebody else do that you've been trying to figure out. So hopefully it'll help untangle some mental knots you have about how to construct those. So that will wrap up the G to C part of the transition series that we're talking about. In the next video, we'll kind of look at going from, say, C to D, which would also be a very common movement in the progression of the key of G. So we'll go from G to G7 to C, and then we'll see if we can get from C to D, which would be another common movement in a 1-4-5 chord progression. So I hope you had fun. Appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.